Is Trevor Lawrence officially undervalued in your dynasty leagues? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her work on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. You can follow her at Pro Football Focus, Behind the Steel Curtain, Yahoo, and a million other places. On today's show, we're going to be breaking down some of the latest ADP from Dynasty League football at the quarterback position. And Kate, you and I have one of the same takeaways. One of the biggest surprises is Trevor Lawrence. What are your thoughts on Jacksonville's QB?
Trevor Lawrence, I feel like, has been through it this year. I mean, it's been no secret. Obviously, expectations were sky high for Trevor Lawrence. I think he was drafted in redraft leagues somewhere around, QB 6 to QB 8. Everybody was kind of under the assumption that he was going to make this huge third-year leap. Second year with Doug Peterson as his head coach, who had Calvin Ridley coming back, you had Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, Evan Ingram, Travis Etienne. The expectations were so monumentally high, and he didn't perform. And I think that's kind of where we can leave it. But I think at QB 12, when we're considering the number one overall pick, a former number one overall pick, 24 years old. He is, I don't know that he's lived up to the generational moniker just yet, but by any stretch of the imaginations. But I do think that the perception of this season is probably a little overshadowed by the disappointment for fantasy production. Like watching the game. So from a statistical perspective, interestingly, Trevor Lawrence averaged 7.1 yards per pass attempt, which actually is a career high for him. 8.6 yard average depth of target helps with that. That's also a career high PFF passing grade, which kind of surprised me. You didn't see too much of a significant drop off in terms of his NFL pass rating. Actually had a career high QBR. This wasn't on paper, wasn't statistically as terrible a season as I think it felt watching it play out. Now, when you're watching the games, it felt like every pass attempt, every missed throw, every missed connection felt about this close from being a monstrous play that could have changed the trajectory of a season. It felt, and it actually, I felt like was the story of the Jacksonville Jaguars as a whole. Defense, same thing. Special teams, same thing. It just felt like they were always a play away from almost putting together something very complete. And I think that rolls right over into Trevor Lawrence. Now, when you look at the draft capital, when you look at all of these factors combined, the job security, the situation with his head coach, the fact that he should be healthy heading into the 2024 season, he's being drafted on average as QB 12, Marcus. I think that's far too low for the kind of upside that Trevor Lawrence has.
And I want people to remember the injuries. I think everybody remembers the high ankle sprain that he had. I'm trying to remember what game that was. It was the Cincinnati game, excuse me, where he came back 6 days later and played on the high ankle sprain against Cleveland. Had an up and down game. Actually, it was fine for fantasy, not so great for real life. But that wasn't the only injury he had. The shoulder injury caused him to actually miss a game at the end of the year that they needed to win. They did win, end up winning it with CJ Beathard. Wasn't 100% in week 18. But if you remember early in the season, he also had this mysterious knee injury. They were supposed to play the Saints, or they played the Saints on a Thursday game. it was in question whether he was even going to be able to play that game. He comes out and actually has an awesome game. So between a knee injury, high ankle sprain, and a shoulder injury, he played through it all, only missed a single game. And you mentioned all the efficiency numbers. Let's not forget, also ran for a career high this year as well. I'm surprised that the Dynasty community hasn't given up on Trevor Lawrence, but they're down on Lawrence. The fact that I see guys like Justin Fields, where we don't even know where he's going to play next year, is several spots ahead of him. Kyler Murray, who's had a big injury, Dak, who's 30 years old and could potentially be on the move after the 2024 season. I'm shocked. Okay, I'm shocked that he's down to QB 12.
And Marcus, I'll say I do think that some of this is a little bit reactionary. So obviously, if you've been playing Dynasty for several years, or even if you hadn't played Dynasty at the point where Trevor Lawrence came out of the NFL draft, you probably remember the hype, at least the NFL hype. But the fantasy hype, the Dynasty hype was just as significant. People would cut off their left arms in order to draft Trevor Lawrence in their Superflex rookie drafts at the number 1 pick in their drafts. And let's be honest. I mean, for a guy that had been labeled as generational, yeah, he hasn't lived up to the bill. But I also think we're probably discounting a lot of what we've seen on the field just because of that fact that, okay, yeah, it hasn't lived up to the very high standards that we set up for this guy. Right off year one, obviously I think most people have, but even in years 2 and 3, like we have to kind of consider probably year 4 more of his year 3, considering,
Oh my gosh,
Urban
yeah.
Meyer and
Yeah.
that whole situation. But I think all in all, Trevor Lawrence, from a security standpoint, from a upside standpoint, I don't know how we could pass up that kind of value at QB 10 for a lot of the big time question marks. I mean, Anthony Richardson even, and obviously very, very different quarterbacks. Anthony Richardson several spots ahead of him in the Dynasty ADP rankings. We saw a lot of upside and potential when he was on the field this year, but guess what, Marcus? He hasn't been on the field because of a season-ending injury. He has a long history of health concerns. Trevor Lawrence, we've seen he's been available, and I think we know what his floor is from a passing standpoint. I think it's probably a lot higher than Richardson. Like I think the biggest point to bring up here is the number of question marks regarding the prospects that are ranked ahead of him at this point.
I will also say, and I know you can make this case for just about every other quarterback, but Lawrence had to deal with a lot in terms of his left tackle was suspended for the first 6 games of the season. He had a rookie right tackle. Zay Jones missed a big chunk of time. Calvin Ridley was just getting back into the offense after being suspended basically the last 2 full years. Christian Kirk got hurt at the end of the year and never came back. There was just a lot of turmoil on that offense. And listen, I get that it happens for a lot of quarterbacks, but especially for Lawrence, who was dealing with 2 to 3 pretty significant injuries, I am willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. I think at QB 12, Kate, he is an instant buy for me, especially if you don't have to give up, a top 6, top 7 quarterback even to get him. I just like that price at QB 12. I think the ideal strategy if you are in a 1 QB league is to try to get Trevor Lawrence and pair him with the Jordan Love and try to have a lot of upside there. If you're in a 2 QB league, even more of a reason to go out and get him.
Yep, for sure.
All right, let's talk about some other quarterbacks out there that we think are maybe a little bit undervalued right now, including somebody up north. We will get to them next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL regular season is over, and we're getting closer to the Super Bowl, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That is $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use, and there's so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays. You can find bets in the new Explore tab. you can make a parlay at the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays. You can even go bet right now who you think is going to win the Super Bowl, whether it's going to be an NFC team or the AFC team. I'm kind of leaning AFC right now. So many fun bets. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup with FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, Kate, let's get back to talking about some of these ADPs in the dynasty startup drafts. I want to talk about some quarterbacks who are undervalued. Who do you got?
Undervalued. I do think we've probably this is gonna probably get me lots of heat with the dynasty community in particular, but I do think we have to talk about Kirk Cousins, who I know he's old. I know he's coming off an Achilles injury, but Marcus, you look at the production from Kirk Cousins when he is on the field, and he is on the field most of the time. He is killing it. Over the last 3 seasons, he has 12 fewer completions than Joe Burrow, 296 fewer passing yards, 4 fewer touchdowns, 8 fewer interceptions, 4 fewer rushing touchdowns than Joe Burrow over the last 3 seasons. And I mean, even from an on the field comparison, they are not even thought of in the same stratosphere of quarterback. Obviously, there's not a ton of rushing upside from Kirk Cousins, but you look at the situation for me. Obviously, it's a bit of an unknown. He's going to hit free agency this year. We don't know if he's headed back to Minnesota. If he is, goodness gracious, is he in a fantastic spot to continue on an absolute tear as a passer. You have Justin Jefferson, you have Jordan Addison, you have TJ Hawkinson, who probably not going to be ready here to start the 2024 season, but you have one of the best slates of weapons in the entire NFL. Okay, let's say he actually hits free agency, he doesn't return to the Minnesota Vikings. You look at some of the situations here, when you look at the quarterback needy teams in the NFL, Marcus, there are some pretty interesting and desirable spots here. Like, for instance, obviously the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, we talked about them at length on Monday's show. Baker Mayfield, I have to imagine they bring him back, but not a given. Imagine
Sure.
Kirk Cousins in Tampa Bay. They have Chris Godwin there. Maybe they decide to bring back Mike Evans, which I think they'd be insane not to. Boom. That'd be a dream situation. Okay, maybe we go to, I don't know, the Atlanta Falcons,
That's
where
what
they
I
have
was
some of
thinking
the best offensive personnel in the entire NFL. Maybe you look at the Chicago Bears. Maybe they trade away Justin Fields, walk away with Marvin Harrison Jr. in this year's draft. You've got DJ Moore, Marvin Harrison. I'm just saying, from a standpoint of, kind of open quarterback competitions, Marcus, Kirk Cousins, he's got kind of his pick of the lot right now. And I think he is in a fantastic spot heading into free agency. I think he's got the world ahead of him. Even the Washington Commanders, Marcus, you look at
Go back to Washington.
go back to what? Go back. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that would be actually the most amazing storyline of all. You look at the Washington Commanders, which they don't even have a head coach. They don't have anything, but you pair, Kirk Cousins with Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, some of their young tight ends, John Bates, they've got some really interesting weaponry. I just don't know that there's a wrong spot where Kirk Cousins could land. And you look at from his play style perspective, he's not a rushing quarterback. He's a pure pocket passer. Those Achilles injuries, obviously, we have not seen what they might do to the quarterback position as Kirk Cousins plays it. Obviously, you have, Aaron Rodgers also dealing with an Achilles injury, but even Aaron Rodgers, more of a mobile guy who, even in his older age, navigating the pocket, that's an element to his game. Kirk Cousins can stand. He's a statue, baby. if he can make a recovery, it's not an injury that is necessarily going to affect, I think, his production overall, as long as he is rehabilitated. Like I just, there's nothing wrong with Kirk Cousins. And Marcus, I think he needs to be scooped in literally every dynasty league, because I'm looking at this ADP, man, and I'm all in on Kirk Cousins, and he's QB 19. He's being drafted on average behind Baker Mayfield, Matthew Stafford, and I think he's a hell of a lot safer.
I think Kirk Cousins has enough cachet right now to basically know that he's going to go to a situation where he isn't going to go to a bad team without receivers and a bad offensive line. Like, he's smart. Like, he knows, okay, worst case scenario, I go back to Minnesota on a 2-year deal, and that's where I play. If he goes to Atlanta, it's because he believes that the Falcons have the talent and the personnel to be a really good team. So I think from that point, he's really safe. I also think he has more upside than maybe some people anticipate. Just going to throw this one out there. I don't know if you read the ESPN piece this week about the 49ers, but buried in that piece, there was some quotes about how Kyle Shanahan this offseason wanted to go out and get Tom Brady to replace Brock Purdy, right? And have Purdy go back on the bench and have Brady as his starting quarterback. It's been pretty well known that Kyle Shanahan has been looking to potentially grab a veteran to run his offense. And we know Kyle Shanahan's history with Kirk Cousins, absolutely loved him when he was in Washington. Suppose that the 49ers get beat by the Lions in the championship game, and it's because Brock Purdy struggles. I could see a situation where Kyle Shanahan tries to court Kirk Cousins for a year or two to come run that offense. And can you imagine Cousins running that offense with Deebo Samuel, Brandon? The odds of that happening are pretty low. But the point is, I think wherever Kirk Cousins lands, he's going to be on a team surrounded with weapons, with a good offensive line. And that's why I agree with you. Like, if you don't have to pay top 18 prices to get Kirk Cousins, who was on an absolute tear before he got hurt, I agree. I think he's one of the best values.
I just don't think there's any way that if Kirk Cousins is playing football at this point, that he's not a top 12 quarterback, period, regardless of landing spot. Because like you said, the something about a cachet, I don't know, but every ball is in Kirk Cousins' court right now. And Marcus, you mentioned the upside. So, obviously didn't get to play a full game, a full 17 game season, but in the 8 games he did play, he finished as a top 12 quarterback in all but 2 of those games. And that's including the final game where he was forced early with that Achilles injury. Had 3 finishes inside the top 5 to start the season. The upside is tremendous. And again, he's one of these guys that I think every single year flies under the radar because he's not sexy. He's not a Russian quarterback. Maybe we should get over it.
I'll just mention really quickly the guy that I think is undervalued. I actually mentioned him in yesterday's show. Deshaun Watson is QB 23. And if you look at the other names that are being drafted, like around him, Derek Carr, Russell Wilson, Geno Smith, Daniel Jones, Kenny Pickett, Aaron Rodgers, Trey Lance, very good scenario. Like, all of those guys aren't starting by 2025. But do you know who will be? Deshaun Watson, because of his contract, right? And because of what Cleveland had to give up to get him. I just think that there's a good chance that in year 3 with Cleveland, he looks significantly better. Obviously, the shoulder injury is something that we need to watch, but I thought he looked pretty good in his final 2 games. We'll see what it looks like. I just think when you're paying top 24 prices for Deshaun Watson and he's on an offense I think is pretty good. He's only 28 years old. I'm in. That's all.
I think very, very fair. Obviously, the biggest question for him is availability to this point, because yes, he has not been available, and that has been kind of the nail in his coffin. And honestly, from an availability standpoint, that also makes it very hard to get into rhythm over the course of a season and continue to build that rapport. So if he can return in 2024 healthy, we obviously know that, like, from a career standpoint, he does have top 5 fantasy upside. We haven't seen it to this point in Cleveland. It's been a long time since we've seen it, but you look at the weaponry there, even, some of their depth there, like, a Cedric Tillman, who I think is Sky could be the limit there. David Njoku, Amari Cooper, they've got an incredible group of weaponry there that presumably it's going to be Deshaun Watson throwing to him for a long, long time, as long as he's healthy. So I think that's perfectly fair.
All right, let's talk about some quarterbacks who are overvalued right now in the recent batch of Dynasty ADP. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is the fastest and the easiest way to buy tickets for all of the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And right now, all users get $100 off when you buy a big game ticket with code Vegas100 with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat in their best price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Gametime is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. See the view from your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. All-in prices show your total upfront so you know that you're getting a great deal before you check out. Buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Right now, Gametime users get $100 off a big game ticket with code Vegas100. Terms apply. Just download the Gametime app. Use code Vegas100, all one word, for $100 off a big game ticket. Or if you're not going to the game, use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. On tomorrow's show, Matt Williamson is joining us to answer your Dynasty questions. So make sure you send in our questions or send in your questions to us at Marcus_Mosher, at Kate Majuk. Okay, let's wrap up by talking about a couple quarterbacks who are overvalued. Who do you got?
I have to talk about Tua Tagovailoa. And again, this is one of those players that, let me be clear, on the field, like excellency and incredible play on the field does not always translate to fantasy football scoring. Over the past 2 seasons, I mean, Tua has been lights out, one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL when he is on the field. And there is no question about that whatsoever. Ranked 4th in the league in total passing yards over the past 2 seasons, 5th in the league in total passing touchdowns, 8th in big time throws, 2nd in NFL passer rating. Like, I am not here to debate. I'm not here to debate about Tua's excellence. 2nd in yards per pass attempt. Like, he has been absolutely incredible. But Marcus, let's talk about fantasy specifically, right? Fantasy. Over 50 career starts in the regular season. How many of them do you think he scored 20 or more fantasy points in?
8?
12.
Close.
12 out of 50. He has had 2 or more passing touchdowns in just 22 of them. Every bit of his efficiency obviously comes from him as a passer. Can you guess how many games we've seen where he has had 10 or more rushing yards?
Oh, man. 10?
12. It's been like,
be closer. Ask me another one. I'll be closer this time.
Ooh, you know what, Marcus, how about this? We're looking at, his fantasy finishes, right? How many times do you think, for all of that efficiency this year, that Tua finished as a top 5 quarterback?
The answer is not 12. I'm going to say that. Just this year, I'll say 6.
3 times in the top 5. How many times do you think he finished as a top 12 quarterback following their week 10 bye?
1, 2.
2 times.
Yeah.
2 times as a top 12 quarterback in the second half of the season. Marcus, that sucks. Like, he finishes the overall quarterback 9, but this is what you got from him throughout the fantasy playoffs. Week 14, QB 23, 23, QB 20, QB 16, QB 25 to close out the year. I rest my case. Tua, I love watching play football. Obviously, he is attached to some very high-end talent. But Marcus, we talked at the beginning of the show about Trevor Lawrence and his value at QB 12. Tua's only 1 spot behind him at QB 13. And boy, oh boy, I look at the production. Trevor Lawrence, he has had fewer starts and he has been far more productive. Sure. Trevor Lawrence, actually a year younger than Tua. I think, again, one of the biggest mismatch price values in terms of Dynasty value, production, but also he's one of those mismatches where the production we're seeing on the field and the excellence as a passer just doesn't necessarily always translate to scoring fantasy points.
And I'll be quick with mine. It's Joe Burrow at QB6. There's just options behind him I like a lot better, including Justin Herbert. I mean, Joe Burrow's his injury history is really starting to pile up between the torn ACL his rookie year. He had obviously the calf injury this year, and then he has the hand surgery. On top of that, he just lost his offensive coordinator in Brian Callahan, likely to lose T. Higgins in free agency. Joe Mixon's likely to be gone after this year. Not saying that Joe Burrow is going to be a bad quarterback. I just worry about his fantasy value a little bit because as he gets older, obviously you're not going to have hardly any rushing production. He's going to have to it's going to all have to be based just on volume in the touchdown production. And I just would rather have a Justin Herbert who's 2 years younger. He's bigger. He's been more durable. He's more athletic. He plays in a dome, which I'm going to keep pushing this point. I think that matters a lot, especially when we get to the fantasy playoffs. I just think at QB6, he's a little bit overvalued right now.
And then you look at the competition there, within the conference, right? Obviously, defensively, AFC North football, not an easy place to play football, both from a weather standpoint, and you're going to have to go up against the Baltimore Ravens twice a year. When healthy, obviously the Steelers have been an excellent defensive football team. Like there are a lot of teams with which you have to compete. The Cleveland Browns, one of the best defenses in the NFL. When they're at 100% health, I'd argue that 3 of the top 5 NFL defenses are located in the AFC North. That's all another roadblock for Joe Burrow, in hitting some of that relevancy. So I definitely think there are a lot of red flags. Obviously, the upside is tremendous, but I do think one of the most underrated aspects there is the T. Higgins component. Tyler Boyd, I also believe, is set to hit free agency, which I know he's been an ancillary kind of guy, but these are all a lot of changes that Joe Burrow is going to have to contend with here in the coming season. Hopefully,
on top of potentially not being able to throw until training camp, right? Like,
yeah,
lot going on, a lot of uncertainty with the Bengals moving forward. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every single day. Go check out the YouTube channel. We post videos every single day. Kate's been posting these awesome shorts. Go check them out. They're really, really well done. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. Check out our work at Pro Football Focus, Behind the Steel Curtain, and Yahoo. I'm at Marcus_Mosher. We will see you right back here tomorrow with Matt Williamson. You're not going to want to miss that show.